give people their time back. We good with that, Sharon?
Yep, that's great. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. We've had a response of sort of, well, at one point about 160 people. So, and I think that's even upwards from there. So it is a big session, as Sharon has said. And we really appreciate everyone investing their time tonight to get involved. So excellent attendance. I'd just like to welcome the Cricket Victoria people here tonight. So we've got Will Rice, who's our competition support officer, and he'll be driving the technology. So he's very important tonight. Good luck with that, Will. Darren Anderson is our competition manager, and Paul Milo, our head of members and services. And they'll be running tonight, pretty much facilitating tonight's session. They've done quite a few of these over the week as well, so it should roll out hopefully fairly smoothly. I'd also just like to welcome Sharon Linus, who's the club officer for the East Metro region, and Clinton Kennan, who's the area manager for the East Metro region. So my name's Stephen Box, and I'm the cricket manager for the region. Just so we can frame this up a little bit for tonight, I'd love to think that we had all the answers for this situation we're all in, but clearly we don't, and it is evolving as we go. So tonight we won't have all the answers for you, but I hope what it does do is assist you in that we're here to support where we can. And the other thing I want to thank is the association committees and presidents and junior coordinators who have worked pretty tirelessly with us as well on making sure we're in the best place possible. So they've met, they've had this presentation presented to them last week. So I just want you to have some comfort that they are also well and truly in the loop, and they're somebody you can lean on as we move forward. And we're really appreciative what they've been able to do for us as we move forward. Clearly this will evolve as the season goes on. If we knew when the season could start and all those things, it would make life easier. We don't have a magic wand that can do that at this point. So what I'd just like to do now is hand over to Sharon, who will just take us through a couple of housekeeping things, and then she'll pass on to Paul and Darren and we'll jump in. There's certainly a chat line here. Sharon can brief some people on how to use that if you don't know, to keep the communication open. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And yeah, we're here to support where we can. Thank you. Sharon.
I think Sharon's on mute.
I'm on mute. Sorry, I just wasted everyone's time. Sorry. I've been talking to myself. Sorry. While we are meeting online today and across a variety of locations, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands from which we are joining and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Especially this weekend, I believe one of my colleagues said it was the Doug Nicholls round for football, so it's quite handy to know. I apologise, but we ask that you keep your microphone on mute during the main session to ensure everyone can hear clearly. We'll be monitoring this, so if you're having trouble, we can and will do this from our end. Similarly, we ask that you leave your video off as well. As you can tell, we've got a very big audience tonight, so this will assist anyone with weaker internet connections to ensure they can still hear and take part. We would like to also welcome our Auslan interpreter, Paul, tonight, who will hopefully remain on screen through tonight's session. Hopefully he's been pinned to Simon and Benjamin's screen, I'm hoping. We strongly encourage your questions. If you need to ask a question, you can submit these through the chat function to answer as we go, or we'll answer at the end if we haven't got to them. There will be time at the end for questions, so anything that doesn't need to be addressed immediately will be saved until then. The session is being recorded, so any issues, please let us know after the session. And I'll throw to Paul Milo to kick things off. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Sharon. Certainly appreciate everyone dialing in, giving up your time. I know we're living in Melbourne, we're in lockdown, but there's a lot of other things you could be doing, and appreciate that you'll have club meetings as well as work and family commitments as well. So we'll certainly try and keep to the hour. But as has been Sharon and Stephen has said, please use the chat function as you go. Any burning questions that you've got, we want to answer them. We've run a couple of these sessions, one last night and earlier today. Got another one tomorrow, and run some for Premier clubs as well. And it only works with your questions, because we'll certainly cover what we sort of think, I guess, the average club might be interested in. All of us are connected to local clubs, so we certainly understand that a lot of the challenges will fall to volunteers this year. But I guess we've got to really look at this as it's going to be an absolutely unique year. Playing cricket, and absolutely we hope and expect that we will be playing cricket. We've got to view it as a privilege this summer, and there will be some complexity and some extra work that'll be needed, and some extra thought that goes into training nights and match day. But it's absolutely possible. There's community cricket going on over in England that we're getting learnings from, and learnings from other states as well. But a quick go through of the agenda. We'll go through a little bit of background to get to where we're at tonight. The three main topics that we want to cover. But certainly ask the questions in the chat, and we'll work our way to get to those as much as we can, and we'll touch on the resources that are available to help for all the clubs as well. Yeah. So just in terms of
yeah, that's what I want to roll, but I can see down the track, mate, that we're going to need to do it.
Yep. I'll just put you on mute, Wayne, if that's okay. So just if anyone's got any questions to ask, just put them into the chat function, as we've said. So in terms of where we're at now, when COVID hit, I guess all businesses and everyone throughout society worked towards what the solutions were and what the things that we would need to take into account. Sport was no different, and obviously cricket was no different. Sport Australia went into action pretty quickly to look at the two key parts to what needed to be focused on, which was high performance sport. And we'll touch a little bit on that in terms of what we're seeing over in England and international cricket, and also at the AFL, how it is going to be very different to what we're seeing at a community level this summer as well. A lot of advice from the ICC, but their regulations were for international cricket. Each country needed to look at their own protocols. So Cricket Australia went into action to look at what is appropriate for our elite teams, but what's also appropriate for community cricket based on the Sport Australia protocols that were set down. So significant medical expertise that was based on that. So we're certainly not requiring clubs or associations to look for their own medical expertise. That work has been done, and we'll share a lot of that work in the background. There's a lot of things that continue to be learnt. There's things that might be outlined now that might change by October, but certainly the work that we've done has got us to the point we're at. What we needed to do as a state, like all state sporting associations, was put forward our plans that took into account the Cricket Australia advice, Sport Australia advice. That went through SRV and through Vic Sport to be signed off, and that was sort of ticked off at the start. Well, it was ticked off at the start, which was great. Our return to train and play documentation, which is available on the homepage of the Cricket Vic website, was then developed. That's been changed a few times based on the changing state government advice. When we sort of went into stage 2, then 3, then 4. And there was even changes throughout that time about how many could be in groups, et cetera, So the latest documentation is on the Cricket Victoria website, which talks about what we expect it'll be, or what it was before we went into stage 4 lockdown and before we couldn't train or play. So that was the information that was available at the time. The website's been updated significantly. We've also sort of worked with Marsh. If anyone's hasn't got their camera or they're on mute, that'd be handy, just so everyone can hear the detail. We've checked with the insurers. There is information on the Marsh website. So Marsh, a lot of people will know JLT Sport. Marsh is the new company that merged, took over JLT, and information is on there for any clubs that are getting questions from your council about whether or not insurance is in play. Yes, it is. There's no change to the insurance cover that's available. Working with the state government every week, at least weekly, promoted the grants. A lot of clubs in east of Melbourne. I know there's some clubs from all around Victoria on tonight, but a lot of clubs were successful in that, which was great. Running these workshops. So there's a lot of work that's gone into the background. There will be a lot of information tonight. We will be sharing the resources. But I guess the key thing from tonight is there'll be information. We talk about match day. Don't panic too much about what a match day might look like because that's obviously at least a couple of months away. So just prioritising what the clubs can focus on right now, and we'll certainly touch on those as some of the ideas that we've got. So a lot of information to take on board, but sort of one step at a time. So I might hand it over now to Darren just to talk about the conversations we had with the associations last week and move through the key slides.
No worries. Thanks, Paul, and good evening all. As Steve mentioned earlier, last week we had over 120 representatives from Metro and Country Victoria join us for our association-specific webinars. Broadly speaking, we covered off on the following areas: start dates. Technically, we could start October 3rd, given the seasonal agreement, but we would need to consider preparation time for turf wickets for those competitions and checking with local council about when the work would commence to get them ready, given that a number of them across metropolitan Melbourne have stood down their ground staff. Adequate notice to players and officials before round one, especially those with work plans. And even if they need to make up some hours, if they haven't been working over the last few weeks, adequate time for players to prepare for round one and avoid injury, especially bowlers. We're thinking maybe perhaps 3 weeks is adequate, 2 at the very minimum, noting that a lot of people will have been sitting on couches and caught in their homes with minimal exercise and time to get out and get moving over the last few months, even since last cricket season. So we want to avoid injuries. The feedback from High Performance for Premier Cricket, ours was a little bit longer, and we're mindful that community cricket does work slightly differently. Based on the input from the associations last week, we know that the season start times will more than likely vary. However, we've shared with them a document which we put together, which might assist them in their planning and communicating the start date proposals with their clubs. The protocols that we went through we'll tick off a little bit later on, but they cover off examples for players, for umpires, bowlers, match day setup, and scorers. We've been working pretty closely with Cricket Australia and the other states around those protocols and guidelines to be able to provide the recommendation out. And pleasingly, the majority of associations all came back requesting Cricket Victoria provide them with the recommendations so that they could implement them as a bit of a unified approach. One of the questions we do get asked is around sharing of equipment. And basically, there's to be no sharing of equipment. Protective equipment, including gloves, pads, helmets, are designed to absorb sweat. So if other people are touching these, they could be impacted. And we're even being told back grips with gloves on based on the medical advice could become an issue as well. Recommendations are to also avoid communal afternoon tea. So we're requesting players and umpires to bring their own food and their own drink bottles for the drinks breaks. Another consideration we asked associations to be mindful of is perhaps looking at having 5 overs bowled from one end and rotating through for especially the junior age levels to save a fair bit of time and players crossing paths. We're mindful that a number of junior players and even junior coaches are involved in Saturday afternoon senior cricket as well. So given the fact that there's going to be more time added to games with sanitising every 6 to 10 overs, we're thinking it's going to add 20 to 30 minutes to game time. So we don't want players then running late to their senior game. So being able to bowl 5 overs from one end might help condense the games a little bit, especially in the junior environment. Formats this year is an opportunity to try new things. We've never seen a season like this before, and hopefully we'll never see one like this again. So there's an opportunity for associations to do things slightly differently. And we think one-day games as a priority would be a good starting point. So there's a number of benefits to playing majority of one-day games, especially early on, because it means that the preparation time for bowlers is a little bit limited, and they don't need to do as much work as they'll only be bowling shorter amounts of overs and spells as opposed to two-day games. Means we can also get through a number of games early in case a third wave hits and we need to break mid-season, and gives us a chance to then get a bit of a run towards a final series if enough rounds are completed. Gives the players an opportunity, especially top order batters, to face top order bowlers more often, and saves a situation where a batter may, for instance, not get a chance at applying their trade for 4 weeks because his team fielded first the first week, they got washed out the second, and then they fielded first the next game, and then it was time to bat 4 weeks after the start of the season. And then finally, they're avoiding the issue of if a player or multiple players within a team or club need to isolate midway through a 2-day game, and there are impacts around that. Obviously, the associations would come up with the protocols of how those matches would be decided and player replacements if need be. But the guidelines we're being given and recommendations will be that pretty much those matches are considered a draw as opposed to a forfeit due to the impact of what would happen. We also threw out there the possibility for potential for a short T20 comp, whether that be midweek or on weekends or a bit more of a social focus. The benefits of this would be maybe 4 to 6 weeks plus a final for either juniors and or seniors, and you can really target those who haven't committed to the season yet, especially footballers, soccer players or netballers who may have missed out on getting to play a winter season but don't want to commit to a full year. Ultimately, the role of clubs and associations will come down to the Department of Health and Human Services to decide how many players and officials and who need to isolate across what dates. It won't be up to the club or the association. So clubs that better prove the list of close contacts will be better placed, and we'll cover off on ideas around that with QR codes and registers and attendance tracking. Rule changes, we threw out there that associations probably need to be aware of their rules and whether or not they need to call for an EGM if playing conditions and rule changes are required, and letting their clubs know well in advance of that if need be. And then the other thing that we're still in contact with the state government and working with Cricket Australia on is the Woolworths Cricket Blast programs, where we generally see high numbers of participants and parents at one venue at one time. So what requirements will be put in place around smaller groups, maybe separate sessions and all that. We're still not sure, but based on what we've already seen with the way level 2, we're expecting it to be a reduced number as opposed to say 100 to 150 kids on the oval, and then nearly the same or if not double the parents that are there. So as we get more information from the government and from Cricket Australia, we'll communicate this out to the clubs, but it's just something to be aware of at this stage. Moving into the 3 key areas that we really want to focus on tonight, being financial, training and match day. We'll go through the financial and training slides and then have a bit of a break and come back and answer any questions that may have come up to that stage. And then we'll do the same with the match day, because we're tipping that there might be a few questions around match day. But the number one priority, I think, is for clubs to ensure that their whole committee, their coaches, their players understand this won't be a normal year. Cricket in a pandemic will be a privilege, but it will also be a lot more onerous, and things will look a lot differently to what players and volunteers are used to. Forget about playing cricket on a Saturday afternoon and then having a few drinks and that after the game and being quite social. That's something in the past, and hopefully we can get back to that in the future, but it won't be happening this year. And it's just making sure players are aware of what to expect. We'll move through to the financial area, and we'll just touch on a few things that we want to throw up for clubs to be aware of, just to really start thinking about. New COVID equipment, as Paul previously mentioned, the Return to Cricket website is offering signage and sanitizer and hygiene products, whether that's in bundles or individually purchased. We'll also put up a link to what Frankston Peninsula Cricket Club have done with their signage as well, to give clubs a bit of an idea. But also we do recommend that clubs speak with their local council and their school as soon as possible to find out what requirements are going to be needed, what supplies are needed, who will be doing the cleaning, how often will cleaning need to take place, and then being able to build a financial case around that. Looking at potential new sponsors even then tying them into the equipment. So those that haven't been impacted by COVID, they might be able to sponsor the sandwich board with signage, or they might be able to sponsor some other things. Speak with your co-tenants, the winter clubs, about sharing signage costs if need be, and even the case that usually happens at the end of most seasons where the excess alcohol and soft drink and food is then is sold across and handed over. You might be able to do the same with the sanitizer, because we expect that they're going to need it for their winter seasons as well. When doing cash flow and budgets, it's going to need to be ongoing assessment for any extra costs that come up, and expecting for reduced revenue with potentially loss of sponsors or minimal sponsorship, and even reduced subs. Existing sponsors, think of ways that you can maximize their promotion, whether that be through social media, sponsoring a hosted webinar for members, sponsor sale rebates, direct membership and at ground signage, or even apparel. Fundraising and grants, consider the different options to traditional ground events. So maybe doing things online where people can partake in the events, but at home. Prioritize exploring grants and keep an eye out for the upcoming round of community cricket grants through the Grassroots Cricket Fund, and other grant opportunities that are available. Social functions may not be able to be taking place this year. We're not sure. But start thinking around the liquor licensing and know your liquor license. Do you have a booth license? What does that mean? The timings around the booth license. Should you be looking at doing that with regards to getting the ability for players to be able to have a drink outside, outside the change rooms rather than being inside? Make sure you're aware of what your requirements are and what you might need to look at. With regards to apparel, do you need new apparel this year? Extra player and family costs, and you might get stuck with excess. Balls, you may need extra training balls, but you don't want to get a full stock for summer in case the season is shortened. Talk to your local retailers. We know Kookaburra have plenty of cheaper option training balls and seconds, or rejects as they call them. When you're thinking about your player base, number of options to consider. Any player that can't afford it, that's worried about the season being cancelled, clubs might be able to look at hardship discounts or working with their local families. If they need to work on Saturdays and can't commit, consider having a midweek T20 team or entering a team on a Sunday or something that fits, and communicate that with your association, because there may be other clubs in the same boat and you may be able to get a division or a league up to cater for those people. If people are worried about COVID-19, make sure you reassure them that CV, the local association and the club have quality plans in place to ensure that they're safe. If you've got new players that haven't played over winter, look at that 6-week T20 comp option, as we mentioned earlier, and really push it to your association, because we think it's an option to bring new people back into the sport and back around your club. When you look at player and coach payments and contracts, make sure you're protecting the club if the season's cancelled. Cricket Victoria's developed some templates for clubs to look at, and they're available on the Cricket Victoria website, and we'll also include links to them in the email we send out on Monday or Tuesday next week following the webinar series with all the information that we gather. No sharing of a playing equipment. Maybe look at a season loan for juniors. A lot of clubs do still have kit bags and kit equipment that they use for training. Maybe divvy that up and provide that to a player who may not be able to afford their own equipment, but it is going to be a tough season. Let parents know early about the no sharing policy so they're aware of it. If you've got any other financial related questions, please make sure you enter them in the chat function, and they'll either be answered by the team that's monitoring it, or we'll circle back to it once we complete the training session here.
So Darren, I've just been looking through. There's no questions just yet, but as Darren said, make sure you ask them as we go. But it might be worthwhile kicking over to the training night now, and hopefully we get some questions through that session.
Yeah, no worries. So at the moment, the state government restrictions, stage 3 in regional Victoria and stage 4 across metropolitan Melbourne are in place. And what we're doing is we're encouraging players not to head down the nets under the banner of exercise to do throwdowns or to practice bowling or hit some balls. We don't want to be doing that. We want to be doing the right thing by the state government. So we ask our clubs to remind their players not to do that. If they're going out for exercise to get fitness, go for a run, jump on a bike. By all means, if you've got a teammate that lives within the 5K radius, go for a run with them, but don't go down the nets to do throwdowns and cricket training. Members of the community will dob sports in and will dob clubs and players into the local law enforcement, and fines may apply. We also might get media coverage, which is the last thing we want to do, because we want to be making sure that we're doing the best thing we can as a sport to be able to get back out on the ground as soon as possible. When we do return, clubs may need to train in separate smaller groups, whether that be 5 or 10, depending on what the government says. Indoor centre training may not be an option, but that will be a cost-saving benefit for clubs. Training on Saturday and Sunday will be a lot easier with the football codes not playing, and there'll be extra weeks with daylight savings for training in the pre-season before the season starts. Talk with your council and school as soon as possible. What are the requirements around cleaning and usage? Some councils are doing the cleaning for clubs. Some councils are expecting clubs to do cleaning every single time there's use, while others are just doing a once a week clean, but wiping down the key touch points after every use. So make sure you're aware of what the requirements are, and ask if they've got a supplier that can help out and what cost would be involved. Reducing the impact of a positive case is going to be really important, and the small group sessions fully separated from others, whether that be 5 in the nets and then 5 at each half of the ground, or perhaps training the 1s and 3s together on the same night and the 2s and 4s on a different night, so that several players may need to isolate and they can not be impacting the rest of the club. Tracking who attends training will also help should there be a COVID case at the club. We've got an example from up in Queensland where there was a positive case at a rugby club, and because they were able to keep the groups to small numbers, and they had a really good contact tracing and attendance record register, they were able to manage that difficult situation and identify the players that may have been in close contact, and therefore they were the only ones that needed to isolate, as opposed to the entire club. And it meant they can continue operating, and the league and the sport can continue to go. So that's going to be really important this year, making sure you've got accurate records and doing those small group sessions. We'll be providing more information about that training register, and we'll send out links once the sessions are all done. Minimise the sharing of training balls is also going to be important. So you may need extra balls. Main bowlers may need to keep the ball for the season, or you may have to have separate sets for Tuesdays and Thursdays, or separate sets for different groups that are training. Cleaning of equipment. A lot of coaches like to have lots of different things: spring back stumps, cones, nets, rebound things. Minimise the amount of training equipment used, and make sure you wipe them down before and after use to avoid any infection. Venue access. Consider toilet access only on training nights. Minimise the chances of infection in the rooms. Also minimise the cleaning costs and time involved. Remember the saying, get in, train, get out. It's going to be a different season. Masks and temperature checks. That will depend on what the state government restrictions are, but it's unlikely for bowlers and fielders. It might be possible for batters in the nets, unless they're doing mainly run-throughs. Temperature checks for players and officials. They aren't part of the requirements at the moment with Cricket Australia's protocols, but it doesn't stop a club or association requiring this as part of their plans. If you've got any other questions around training-related items, please feel free to jump into the chat and put them in there. We'll pause now and answer any questions that come through, and then we'll kick off again with some match day protocols.
Darren, I'll just read out some of the questions that have come through. So wicket-keeping gloves, the suggestion there, we know they normally might share at the drinks break. It might be that actually the same keeper keeps for the entire morning and the rotation is done the next week, or if there is a second set of gloves for that person, they can actually use that. But the normal sharing of wicket-keeping gloves, that's sharing equipment. So that's something, because of the possibility of sweat transferring across, that'd be the best idea for wicket keepers. Any thoughts on canteens was a question. That'll come down to state government restrictions at the time. At this stage, canteens, we think will be okay. They were going to be okay before we were shut down previously. So we anticipate that the canteens will be allowed. Tony asked a question about umpires, which we'll cover in the match day scenario. There's a question about not ideal setting up a new women's team with extra costs. As we said, it certainly isn't an ideal year. There will be extra cost requirements of people buying a helmet or buying some extra gear. Clubs that can loan out equipment for a full season, looking for sponsors, certainly approaching sponsors to say, we've got a new women's team, we'd like you to sponsor the women's team, they need some equipment. So reaching out to try and get that support. But yeah, there will certainly be a requirement for some extra equipment required.
I'll just jump in. We've just got a question around sweat being such an issue, and saying you can shine the ball with sweat in the international scene. It's something that has come up in the last couple of nights where we've been doing these sessions. The difference is the international things that you're seeing on TV are so different to what you're going to be able to expect at a community level, and that's purely because when you watch England versus the West Indies, £17.5 million went into the biosecurity around that test series. So therefore the players were being tested 2 or 3 times a week. They weren't allowed out. It was like what we're seeing with the AFL where they're in a bubble. So therefore the protocols and the rules around international cricket were different because they were able to ensure that the players weren't infected and no infection was going on in those games, where if we're playing at a community level, people are going about their lives, going to their day jobs, mixing in the public, and we can't guarantee that that there isn't going to be infection there through the sweat. And that's the feedback we're being given from all the medical advisors, and that's the reason why it's in. It's what we're seeing on TV, the AFL and international cricket is completely different purely because the amount of money that's being spent on the biosecurity.
There's a question there, or a point from Neil. What if the club decides not to participate? How is this to be addressed by the association for the season? Yeah, that's going to be an association call if a club essentially forfeits the right to play. A question came up about insurance, and I guess there was also a similar one about from Neil as well about the liability if the season goes ahead. That might be, and the club decides not to participate, assuming that it's not. So again, if a club chooses not to participate, that's their choice. Certainly the training and match day protocols have been set based on Sport Australia, Cricket Australia guidelines. It's been ticked off by the state government. So the protocols are there for cricket to go ahead when it's able to, and the state government will say when non-contact sport can play. Cricket is a non-contact sport, so there was a lot more cautious, and there was more rules for winter codes. So football and soccer. Soccer, whilst it's not a tackling sport, was considered contact because of how frequently the players were in close proximity, similar to netball and basketball. But cricket is a sport that's played at a regular distance. There will be times when you're in relative close contact, but not for a big chunk of the game. So the insurance is there if something goes wrong, but certainly if the state government allows non-contact sport to go, the protocols that are in place and signed off by the state government, if they're adhered to, and clubs do their best to adhere to them, yeah, that's the best conditions that are going to be available for community sport to take place.
Yep. So Chris asked the question suggesting that an approved type of wipe be promoted for regular cleaning. That is something that's coming from Cricket Australia. We expect that to arrive any day now, with the details around what kind of wipe would be best to use, given we don't want to be putting alcohol onto the ball because it might affect the surface of the ball. So once that comes out, we will be communicating that out to different people as soon as possible, because it will become a regular part of the match day protocols, which we'll get to soon.
Questions are great, and it's probably just as quick to answer them rather than type them in. So Sarah talks about training won't be able to start until we're in stage 2. It does depend a little bit there, Sarah. They may actually allow training to occur. We saw that with the winter codes. They allow training but not matches. So we'll certainly be monitoring and working with the state government. The state government certainly want community sport to happen. They're aware of the benefits of community sport. We're all aware of the benefits of community sport, not just particularly from a mental health as well as a fitness, physical activity, and connecting the community together. The community haven't been connected together, so everyone wants cricket to take place. But the entire health of the community is the highest priority, and which is why some of the things we're talking about of exercise is there, and people might say we're going to the nets is exercise. We're saying, look, stay home, do the right thing, go out for a run and get some exercise. Let's prioritise the season ahead so we can do our little 1%, and we'll have the protocols there to play safely. But the state government will tell us when we can train, or they'll tell us when we can play. So we'll certainly keep working through that.
Couple of good questions have come in. Wiping balls
Yep.
after training, when can they be used again? Ultimately, it's up to the club. We're wiping balls during the game and using that during the game. So it's not like we're using different balls every game sort of thing. I know high performance wise in Cricket Victoria, they're putting the balls away for 3 days and then using a different set for 3 days. But we're mindful that at high performance, there's a fair bit more riding on it with regards to what's happening with the Australian scene and all that. So if clubs are doing the proper things and cleaning the balls, you can more likely use them at the next session, providing you're doing the right thing. Junior training, one club has said that they've got a large dispenser of sunscreen. They cannot use that. Every player will need to bring their own sunscreen. We don't want use of any communal form of item, whether that be food, drinks, sunscreen, those sorts of things. We want to avoid that as much as possible and limit the touch points for that. And we did have a question around whether or not there's been any consideration to legalised/regulated tampering, either at training or match day, for longevity of the ball and bat v ball. No, there hasn't, and there won't be, is the short answer to that. Basically, this is going to be a year where it's different to everything else, and we need to make sure we're doing the right thing. Too much would need to be put in place to try and work out what an effective way of doing that would be. So if you're a swing bowler, you're probably not going to have a fun year this year, because I'm tipping the ball won't swing as much without the shine on it, unless you can get it to reverse fairly early.
I'll take Neil's one earlier about but what is our liability if a player contracts COVID whilst they're playing or training, especially if the player or family sues? Anyone can sue anyone for any reason, and we're not sitting here saying that we're going to guarantee that no one's going to sue a club or otherwise. It's the same as the risk management protocols. There have unfortunately been people that died at cricket, suffered serious injuries all throughout Australia and throughout the world. The protocols that we're putting in place are important, and that's why we spoke a little bit at the start about Sport Australia and their work, and also Cricket Australia and their work, the medical advice that's been provided. If the state governments are signed off on our protocols and the state governments say that non-contact sport can take place, and if it's taking place to the best of our ability at local club in terms of the volunteers, the insurance is there. So someone can still sue. If they contract the virus at the club, they can sue. They can sue the club, and they would likely to sue the club, the association, Cricket Victoria, Cricket Australia, everyone. It then comes down to the insurers are there to help. But obviously it looks at did the club do its best endeavours to try and prevent the situation. If the club says, look, we had no register, we had no sanitizer, we didn't care, everyone trained together, and we just disregarded the protocols, then it becomes a bit more challenging for the club to defend their actions. But certainly the club trying their best based on the protocols that are there. There's no way that we can say we are going to not have a case of COVID through cricket training and playing. It's trying to prevent that by being the taking care of the training nights, taking care of the match day, having the sort of protocols in place. So it's essentially doing the best we can and sticking to the protocols as much as we can.
We've just had a question come in around the ride sharing with parents with two kids playing at different venues. Can they get another parent to give a lift to the game? Will there be options to wear masks in the car or something along those lines to assist this? This is a state government and Department of Health and Human Services requirement. So hence the reason why we've included it in the return to train and play guidelines. It is a question that's come up a fair bit during our country sessions as well, especially when players are having to travel upwards of 170 kilometres, and quite often they'll do ride sharing, and that's so you don't have as many cars going to games. It's a communication that we'll have with the state government. We understand that there are some issues around it all, but ultimately they're the ones that make the decisions on whether or not we can put certain aspects into play and guidelines. So we're guided by them to a large degree.
Maybe whip through to the next slide, Darren, but keep the questions coming to the side. We've still got about 15 minutes or so we can answer questions as we go.
Yep, no worries. So we'll jump into the match day considerations. As I mentioned, Cricket Australia are working with the other states and Cricket Victoria to come up with some guidelines around a number of things. I've said for clubs to check with councils and schools, but it would be really good to make sure that your COVID-19 officer is on hand when you do that with the council to ensure that they're across all the requirements to be conducted. Players will require hand sanitising quite frequently. No sharing of equipment. The captain will be wiping the ball at regular intervals. And as I said, players to bring their own food and drinks or buy at the canteen. The players that have placed their jumper, their cap, their sunglasses in a designated area when bowling, they are not allowed to give it to a teammate or the umpires. So that will be outlined in the guidelines that come through. Umpires are not to touch the ball at any stage. They're not to hold players' jumpers, caps or sunglasses. They may be required to carry hand sanitizer to reduce the time of players going off the ground every 6 or so overs. And they'll also have wipes for the captain to wipe the ball regularly. The coin toss will be conducted by the person who produces the coin. So the umpire brings the coin, he flips it. If the captain brings the coin, he or she is the one that flips it. Scorers, ideal scenario is they select teams on MyCricket before play, and the same scorer scores for the day. Best via e-scoring, but we understand that that's not always possible, especially in the lower grades. So where there are extra scorers needed for an iPad or for a manual scorebook, the iPad or pens used need to be wiped down before the use for the next person, or a player can bring their own pen. Volunteers need to be aware of the cleaning duties and maintain social distance and wear masks. Spectators, potential for a check-in, like players, officials and volunteers, they need to maintain social distancing, and remember that the public could report a club to the council or media if they're not doing the right thing. The general public, the club should endeavour to make sure that anyone from the general public does not congregate near the players or officials, or at least hear to the state government directions. This could be difficult to deal with, but if it is, make sure you contact the council, or if it becomes a major concern, the police. Priority is the health and safety of players, volunteers and the community. At the venue, signage should be in place. Consider how to best minimise access to the facility as well. Players may be asked to leave bags at their car or 2 metres apart from another bag. Food and drink, no communal afternoon teas and BYO drink bottles that were mentioned. After match is going to be the tricky one. 1.5 metre social distancing, minimising the number of people standing in groups. We know when the football codes were going to start, the maximum was 10 people per group, whilst also 1.5 metre social distancing. So when you've got 22 players and umpires from a game, that makes it a little bit awkward, and we're not going to be able to experience like what we normally do after a match. Masks, based on what the state government regulations are at the time. However, it might not be needed for those who are batting, bowling and fielding, but umpires, scorers, canteen, spectators and the batting team that are already out or waiting to bat may be required to wear masks. That covers a lot of the areas that we're going to go across. Are there any questions related to match day?
We'll try and answer some of those, and we'll go back to a couple. There's quite a few that have come through. Thursday night dinners, will they be a thing of the past? Look, we're hopeful they're not, but what we sort of saying before is plan for the fact that they won't be. A lot of the sports and the advice coming from Sport Australia was having a mindset of get in, train or play and get out. So the thinking with junior football, when they were sort of keen to get up and running, was that players will come in their gear, they'll get out, play the game, get in their car and go, which is clearly not ideal. we want people to hang around at the club, but we want to prioritise the actual matches and also prioritise training. And so things like potentially not having the social rooms open throughout the course of the week, apart from toilets, will not only try and stop the spread, reduce the likelihood of the spread of people congregating internally. It'll also cut down on cleaning costs and time inside the facility. So people turning up, training, just using the toilet, then that needs to be cleaned. That makes it a lot easier for the clubs as well. But we'll touch on the COVID job description in the next couple of slides. Umpire payments change to cash, or we certainly think minimising cash transactions would make sense, not only at the club but also with umpires as well. But again, that'll be for associations to work through if that can be met. So I think CV needs to obtain legal advice. So Neil, yep, back on. Look, where if community sport couldn't be played, the state government would rule it out. If the state government says that community sport can't play, then we're not going to play cricket. If I expect that at some stage they will, and therefore it comes down to the protocols. The insurance is there if something goes wrong. So if someone wants to sue, the insurance is there. If we're not allowed to play, and the state government says there's no cricket that's allowed to play, and an association decides to play, that's when there's major problems for the club or the association. But inadvertent breaches, that's what insurance is there for. If people didn't do the wrong thing and no one got hurt, there's no need for insurance. But if people get hurt or people contract the virus, that's why the insurance is there for, to try and provide that protection. So certainly we've got there's legal advice at the state government level. There's legal experts at CV. The protocols have been signed off, so we're certainly confident we've got as much as what's possible is covered. But we'll continue to get advice every week from the state government, from Cricket Australia. Our legal team will sign off on the documentation as always. So we'll certainly keep addressing that.
There's a couple of questions around the toss. Do they do away with the toss? That's ultimately up to associations to make that decision for themselves. I don't think we need to resort to that. It's just whoever brings a coin tosses it. It's no different to what we currently have with a lot of things.
Simon's asked a question about where to bowlers glasses. That'll be in the protocols that'll come out. So that'll be circulated down through, in the Metro's case of EMCU, to associations, and there'll be a designated spot, but it won't be taken by the umpire. But that'll be in the detail of the protocols when they come out.
There's a lot of questions and comments coming through, so we're just trying to make sure we tick off on it. Payment of umpires, there's a question mark there. Is it cash or does it go to cashless? We've provided associations with a document which might assist them. A number of associations in Metro and Premier Cricket operate that way, where they pay the umpires directly an honorarium, and then they invoice the club. So again, that will be up to the association to decide what they want to do. We do recommend it to avoid the exchange of cash and that sort of thing, with minimising the amount of contact as much as possible.
There's a comment there from Jason about experts claiming no evidence of transmission through sweat. The medical experts at Cricket Australia have relied on, have a view that there is a possibility. It hasn't actually been ruled out that it can't be transmitted through sweat. It is likely that it's lower than saliva, is the opinion, but it can't be ruled out. So maybe it's a little bit more conservative than the ICC's approach, but certainly that is the regulation, and that will be the recommended rules to every association: is no sweat and saliva.
Player temperatures, there's a question, do they need to be taken prior to a match? It's not currently in Cricket Australia's protocols and requirements, but that doesn't stop a club doing it to ensure the safety of their players.
Tim and Neil have spoken about flip a bat or rock, paper, scissors. Yep, whatever's going to work, but it's up to the associations what their requirements are. But from our point of view, whoever's got the coin, they toss it. If you want to flip a bat, you want to do rock, paper, scissors, whatever's going to work.
Yep, we'll touch on the player register and the attendance register shortly. So there's a number of questions coming in about that. We will touch on that in the next couple of slides.
Might move on to those now,
Yep.
I reckon, Darren.
Yep, no worries. So basically, Cricket Victoria's website is going to have a lot of resources and documents, and we're going to be constantly updating that as new things come out. So please make sure you jump on there, have a look in the club and association support section, because that's where you'll find a lot of info. We'll bring up the next slide, which shows you some of the things that you'll find in there. Up the top left, it's the current return to train and play guidelines that we continue to update. 2nd of August was the most recent one, and as changes from the government restrictions come in, we'll continue to do that. Top right is a one-page COVID officer guide, and that's at the back of the current return to train and play guidelines. So it might be a good thing to jump in there and have a look at that kind of guide or planner to see things to be aware of. In the middle, it's a link to Cricket Australia's Return to Play website with a range of resources that clubs should be considering to purchase. They've put this together in packs or individual signage, general health and hygiene, and to basically I think there was 700 or so clubs in Victoria who received the $1,000 Victorian government grant. That's what this kind of grant was used for, to ensure that clubs have some funds there to put money towards returning to play. We understand that it could be a significantly more costly exercise to get back out there, but this is what's been put in place, and we've covered off on a number of things earlier around different ways that clubs could go about getting more money. Reaching out to your council to see if they've got any grants. We know of a few councils that have been mooted to do that. Talk with your existing or new sponsors, especially ones that haven't been affected, to see if they can support the club, and keep an eye out for grants that are coming up on Cricket Australia's website, because we're being told that the Grassroots Cricket Fund will be looking at certain things around this. So the website is returntocricket.com.au. A series of resources have also been put in place. These are the ones at the bottom. There's the Sport Australia attendance register template, and there's also the COVID safety plan. So your council might be happy with you simply confirming that your club's adhering to the CV return to train and play guidelines, and show them that from our website. Or you may need to complete a safety plan, and this is a pretty good template and guide for clubs to do it. So we recommend you download the current return to train and play guidelines and familiarise yourself with the content there, especially that final page. Another alternative to the attendance register is utilising a QR code. So you'll see here that that we've set up a QR code, and we're going to be doing this for all 21 of our premier clubs. And it's simply through Microsoft Forms, and basically it might be a good opportunity for anyone on the call now to pull out your mobile phone, and you get your camera open and hover it across the QR code, and that will then send you through to the website that we've set up, or the form that we've set up for Geelong Cricket Club, and you can see that it takes about 20 seconds to complete. And the important thing is that you're checking in and you're checking out. So we'll set up a template for example template for clubs to access and be able to create their own. And that way they can keep really good track of records. It is safe. It goes through all the requirements for privacy. You can set it up through Office 365, and it's stored in an Excel spreadsheet, and it gives you a timestamp for when people do it, when they're checking in and checking out. So that way you've got a good guide, and you can then provide it to the DHHS and have an accurate attendance data for contact tracing should someone test positive to COVID. So we will send information out about that in the pack that gets sent out following these sessions. And then finally, we've got Cricket Australia's website, the community.cricket.com.au. You'll find a lot more resources there about return to cricket, and you'll also find information about their upcoming webinar series that they're running. They've already run one COVID session. I'm tipping they're likely to run a few more, but they've also got some other sessions that might be of interest to clubs as well. What I might do is hand back over to Steve and the East Metro area team to run through a few more bits, and then we can answer any questions at the end of the session.
Thanks, Darren. Excellent presentation, Darren and Paul. Appreciate all your support. So just we'll move through these fairly quickly. It's just that region contacts. I think probably many of you will know the contacts in the area. Obviously, there's been some changes that have come about over the winter. It's certainly a leaner team, but we're certainly committed to what we're doing. And as we often say, we're open for business. So, let us know and we're here to support. So I think you're probably running your eye, hopefully, over the certain regions we move into. Not sure who's controlling the slides, is it Will? Yeah, thanks. We've still got our coaching and talent specialists, and we've got Shane Coop, Tom Evans, which is predominantly around this East Metro area, with Guy McKenna, who's also helping in the southeast, southwest as well. So these guys will certainly be working through looking for the high performance talent in the areas. Member services. You want me to cover this, Darren, or did you want to cover it off?
No, you go for it, Steve.
So this is just the support we have at headquarters at the junction. You've met Darren tonight, and there's a team there. He's got assistance with Josh Beaumont and Avin that many of you might know, and there's also the participation side, that is the schools, and this Woolworths Blast that we're working through. So all the areas that we used to service are still being serviced. It's just a little bit leaner, but we just got to get a bit smarter how we do it. We've previously been doing some webinars, and as we all would know, that the world's changed dramatically on how we're communicating. For some ways, this forum can actually work quite well. I suppose people will have their own opinions on that. But we have found the opportunity to talk more about volunteer recruitment. We've already run a webinar on that, which was incredibly well attended, as was the raising revenue. So these things are going to continue, and we want to run some more. So maybe the next slide, it's probably on, I think. We are looking to run some more sessions on child safety, school to club transition, and the Woolworths Cricket Blast, which is really important to us moving forward. In the past, we've talked a lot about participation, which is still very important, but we're really starting to crank up more about the school to club transition and get these kids that are in school playing at clubs and registered at clubs. And then growing the girls' cricket, certainly the East Metro teams had many meetings with many clubs already this season on how we can move that forward. So maybe I'll just throw back to the audience if there's any final questions, probably back to Paul and Darren. If not, we can wrap it up. I know a lot's gone through the chat. Maybe I'll throw back to you, Paul and Darren, and have a quick look at the chat and cover those off, and then I can close off from there.
There's a couple of similar questions come through about parents dropping and running with the QR code. So certainly we think a parent that does drop off, if they do take an extra 30 seconds to come up near the net and sign in and go. Again, there will be a bit of extra protocols in place this year, but we certainly found from when sport did continue before the shutdown, parents were so relieved and happy that their son or daughter could actually participate, whether it was basketball or junior footy when that was possible down in Geelong and other parts, that the parents were happy to help out. So we certainly suggest that that the QR code takes 20 seconds to do. So that would be something we'd highly promote. Conscious that we've just gone over the 8:30, we're happy to hang around, and if anyone's got any more questions, to pop them into the chat. We can spend another 5 or 10 minutes addressing those. But I guess if people do need to go, and that you can duck off. Do you want to sign off officially, Steve?
Yeah, well, I can do that. Sorry, Darren, were you going to?
Sorry, there's just a question that's coming from Wendy around templates for clubs around communicating to coaches and players and that sort of thing. Look, we can see what we can come up with, but ultimately every club has different ways of doing things. Some use different techniques, whether that's through social media, through e-newsletters, through team app. Ultimately, it's up to the club and how you go about your own communication process. We don't necessarily have a template newsletter to send out as such, but we can provide resources around the communication you should be putting out there to your players and parents and all that to make sure that they're comfortable, and often send them to the Cricket Victoria website, and there's a lot of information there for them to know as well.
There's a question from Tony. Thanks, Tony, about the cleaning protocols at the club rooms. Yeah, certainly a great pickup. One of the things that we're suggesting is get in contact with the councils there. It's there. They've got the cleaning suppliers, and they've got the cleaning contacts, and they're the experts in their own facility. We will be looking to provide some guidance about different companies that could be used or otherwise, but the key thing that we suggest is get in contact with the council early, and they'll be able to give some advice about the cleaning requirements. Certainly, if they can't, reach out to the regional staff, let us know, and we'll continue to provide some guidance from the top. But speaking to councils, their view is they're certainly happy to have those conversations at club level. But again, if they're not, reach out and we can try and help.
Okay, thanks. Go on, Paul. Sorry, mate.
No, I was just going to keep answering questions. Maybe if you want to do an official sign off, and we'll keep answering questions. There's a couple
and then people
there.
that want to stay can, yeah. So that's great. So just in closing, I think it's important that we start to perhaps put our energy in what we do know, because the thing will keep moving. We know that as well. So the planning, I'm sure this is well and truly on clubs' agendas, and how we can work through that planning. We know your local association is very supportive of what's going on, so don't be frightened to reach out to them as well, or anyone from Cricket Victoria to help us through this. We're also conscious that it can be incredibly overwhelming. There's a lot of information here, and Cricket Victoria is not saying it's the experts at it. We're clearly working with the government, and we're trying to bring out the best information we can. Clinton and myself are also talking to local government, certainly in the East Metro, and we're trying to get more of a consistent message from them as well. So watch this space in that area. But if you've got connections with your local council, certainly lean on them at this time as well. The other thing, of course, is that communication's key in these sort of situations. So hopefully tonight's given some of that communication. Nothing's ever perfect. We're working our way through it. But the communication is really important. And I suppose the intention tonight was to bring people in the loop, start the conversation so we're best prepared as the season comes forward, and we have every chance of moving forward. So I'd just like to thank a couple of people. I just want to thank Paul for doing the sign for tonight. I hope it's sort of worked through this mechanism. Just want to quickly thank Paul, Milo, and Darren and Will for facilitating the session. I thought it was really informative. Excuse me, and Sharon and Clinton. Sharon and Clinton for their support in the East Metro as well. And last but finally, thanks for all you guys for supporting cricket and the work you do in the region. The volunteers and the support you give is enormous, and certainly from Cricket Victoria, we're incredibly appreciative of what you do for cricket in the regions. So we'll stay online here. If you want to stay on, you've got some questions. The team will stay on. But thanks again for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thanks all.
Certainly echo those thoughts. Again, just for those that are staying on, I said there was a question there from Dino about Matchday Canteen. Certainly we're really keen for Matchday Canteen for obvious reasons, but that'll come down to state government restrictions and potential council guidelines at the time as well, if they are banned. Certainly from the early documentation that we saw, they weren't going to be banned. But again, it's just going to be about the protocols that are there, making sure there's plenty of hand sanitizer on hand, so at this stage they're not banned. Similar to a bar at a club wouldn't be banned as well, but it'll come down to what the protocols are at the time about coming into club rooms or not. Certainly those canteens that open out into the outdoor area, it's going to be a lot easier for them, just in case there is protocols that say you shouldn't be going inside. So just been scrolling through, Darren, to try and find if there was any other questions that we hadn't.
There's a couple of hands up, Paul, as well. So you might want to, I'm not sure if you want to have a go there as well while you're having a look.
Look, if anyone, I can't see who's got their hand up. It looks like Kathy.
Okay.
Russ, do you got your hand up if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a specific question?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Thanks.
So I saw
Russ and Cassie.
Yeah, Russ, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? If so, take yourself off mute and fire a question away. No, possibly not. So, Wendy, perhaps if you're still there and wanted to ask a question, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, that'd be great. We'll say no to Alistair. If you've got your hand up, perfect.
Yep, I was just wondering, with junior cricket, it's mandatory now to register them through My Cricket. If we decide, well, we're going to delay the payment of registration fees because we don't even really know at this stage whether the season's going ahead.
Yep.
If we have people registered through My Cricket, do we know if they're going to be hit with that $5 fee either way, no matter what happens?
Yeah, good question. The $5 is effectively the insurance coverage. We've asked the question about will there be the refund on insurance if the season doesn't go ahead? The short answer is pretty much most of it, yes. The reason most of it is that some of the insurance still needs to be there for clubs for the entire season, for the committees. So it's the club management liability part that it still need to be covered. But the two big chunky parts of that $5 is the public liability and personal accident, of which we've been assured that if the season's cancelled, that'd get refunded. So I don't have an exact figure, but it might be, say, for example, $4 out of every $5 would be refunded. That's just a guess. It might be a little bit more, but yeah, the advice is that public liability and personal accident would be refunded if the season doesn't go ahead.
All right, so that's cool. When we advertise, look, we're taking registrations, we say, look, there is the $5, even if we're going to delay the rest of it. That's fine.
Spot on. And then as a club, I guess it's a matter of looking at what your position is. Say, what are your junior fees normally, roughly?
Ours are $135.
$135. So
inclusive.
Yeah, great. So that's a question then about is for example the club's position going to be outside of the $5 for My Cricket? Is the club's position going to be all of that or some of that, or is going to be refunded? And that's probably just the key. As Stephen said earlier, that communication, if the view is there is still going to be some costs that the club does need to keep, just letting all the parents know early, or if that's fully refunded, then yeah, you're aware that yeah, most of that $5 is covered, and as long as you've got a position on the rest of what the club keeps, then yeah, that's great.
Yep, excellent. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for dialing in.
Thanks, Alistair, for joining us.
We just had a question from Paul around advice on appointing and supporting a COVID officer, because it sounds like it's more like a COVID team, and in a way it is. We understand that there's a lot more compliance involved with child safety officers and all different people within clubs, and the requirements on them. All we can really do is provide you with the guidelines that we've got on the website and the planning that is in the back of that return to train and play documentation. There's some good links on Cricket Australia's website, Sport Australia's website, and Play by the Rules around COVID officers and getting a bit more information around that. So jump onto there. But that's what it is. I think having a team and having a number of people as opposed to one person is a good way for clubs to do it. But unfortunately, it's another requirement on volunteers, which we all understand clubs find difficult to get.
And look, and I put in a comment before about that it might be one person per team. It could be the coach. The more people that are there that have there is a relatively simple. It takes up to half an hour online course, which gives a little bit of information to the COVID officer. Because you're going to different grounds at different times, having that ability to have people that are going to be at each ground that's done the course, rather than just one person on the committee and they can't get to all the different training sessions and match sessions. So the more people that are conscious of things to look out for, that'll help. Can
I just add that to Paul? Sorry, yep. Paul Jones, the question. But the other thing, Paul, is I think you're right. It is a team, and it's also an opportunity. And I know this is challenging, but to bring some more volunteers in, maybe that, because this isn't cricket centric, you can bring people in and have a different mindset on different things. So certainly anyone in your club who's a nurse, doctor, teacher, anything in that sort of portfolio. For a lot of them, this is just, they're dealing with it every day, so it's not as daunting as it would be for others on the committee. So I think it is an opportunity to sort of broaden the web where possible. I know that's difficult, but it might bring people in to be involved in your community in a different way.
So that was sort of, Craig, the question there about would you need a COVID officer at each ground? Would certainly encourage that, having someone there that can help, or just to keep a bit of a mindset on that. And we understand that it's a bit of an extra responsibility, as Steve said, but it is a pandemic. The more that we can do to try and help stop the spread and do the right things, the longer the season can go. Because if there's clubs out there that are not even trying, and people from the local council or local area, as Darren said earlier, they'll dob in the club. They'll dob in people that are doing the wrong thing. So the more that we can do to try and prevent it. So if you do have a COVID officer at each ground, that just helps because it's an extra set of eyes to keep an eye out for. It might be that if players that are sitting around watching have to wear a mask, they can just remind them. So they'll have a bit of a mindset on that to help. It's a point there from Andrew. Yep, looking at a bit of a team. Yep. So that was scrolling up.
Do we want to just give Wendy or Russ an opportunity to, if they are still there and have a question, to unmute themselves? If not, they may not be. Russ?
This is Russ. I didn't have a question. I just had my hand up near my head.
No worries. And Wendy, I saw that went to unmute. You there, Wendy?
Wendy?
No, I know I answered a question from Wendy in the chat earlier.
Okay.
It was around templates.
There's a question there from Mick about the COVID 30-minute course. Definitely that's on. So if you go to the Cricket Victoria homepage, on that is the return to play and train guidelines. The last page, which Darren showed in the presentation earlier, has the one-page COVID officer guide. There's a link to that course. So you just click on that page, it'll take you straight to the course. Michelle, the kids that are not the batter, should they be wearing a mask? That'll come down to the state government protocols that are in place at the time. Our gut feel is that masks will be required for quite a while. I can't see, especially in Melbourne, but I can't see in Victoria masks coming off for a while. So let's assume that masks are required in season. Currently, the rules are if you're exerting significant energy, you're going for a run, you don't need to wear a mask almost every other time you do. If you're walking or if you're, so if you're out and about, if you're walking and you need a mask, if you're running, you don't. So the theory there goes that anyone that's batting, bowling and fielding at the time could be asked to run. So our current, and we're still waiting for the state government regulations about that, but the current thinking is that batting, bowling and fielding on the ground won't need a mask. But umpires, scorers, those waiting to bat will. So that's the current thinking at this stage.
I've got a question from Ash. When playing in local parks with the general public using it as well, what's the expectation of clubs? Just try and do your best. There's going to be probably a requirement for any balls that get hit to the boundary and the ball gets returned from someone from outside of the match, either a player or someone from the general public. The match gets stopped and the ball needs to be cleaned. So really trying to reduce the amount of people touching the ball. So that is going to be difficult at juniors where you're on open parks. But just making sure you try and do the best and keep people spread out and away as much as possible with distancing. We understand it can be difficult at juniors when they are in big open parks that other people are using.
And just to sort of reaffirm that, because players will be sanitising their hands, we don't know what the public will be doing. So just that extra, so the ball will be wiped down, and there may be that extra requirement to we'll wipe down the ball. It may be that there's extra sanitizer at the time. There was a question earlier, and I'm not sure we covered off on it about. So we have a big tub of sunscreen. I guess we can't.
Yep.
Can we answer that one?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Darren did.
Yep. will umpires have a role in COVID compliance? Yeah, certainly, and especially if we talk association-appointed umpires. Their role, particularly, and this will come out in the match regulations, that'll be more about policing the sweat and saliva, but also about ensuring there is the sanitizer breaks. So at juniors, when there's parents that are umpiring, it might so the same sort of protocols. They won't touch the balls. They won't touch the caps or jumpers or sunnies from the bowlers. But they might have the sanitizer, depending on what the protocols of the association. If they allow the umpires to have sanitizer, they could give. So each umpire gives 5 players some of the sanitizer as they run past into their next position. That could work as well. So that might be one of the roles that they have. Will rep comps go ahead in January? Great question. Hopefully they do. But again, that's going to be an ongoing question. I was on an hour and a half phone hookup with the VMCU, VCCL, and subbies and Cricket Victoria earlier in our high performance department, and they're planning for it. And fingers crossed, it can go ahead. But we're a little way from that now.
The question around with parents and guardians going to be permitted to watch the game from the boundary or stay in cars. We're still not sure about that yet. We'll continue working with the state government around what they think will be the right thing. We understand that AFL Victoria came out and requested the parents and guardians stay in cars at junior football. We'll let people know a little bit more about that at this stage, but there's no position on it at the moment.
No, look, and it might be that you can be in groups of no more than 5 or 10 in groups, but you have to be 1.5 apart, things like that. We'd love to have a problem of having 1,000 people at all our junior games, and how are we going to keep everyone apart? Sometimes there's only 2 or 3 parents hanging around, and and it's
a health concern as well. In cars during summer in the heat is a bit of a different proposition to in winter when it's more than likely rainy and cold.
One of the things, and we'll put this in the link because I know a few people have dropped off the call now, but there is a note that's going to go out about the opportunity of applying for a grant, not through Cricket Vic, but through the Department of Health and Human Services for shade. So there might be some extra shade sort of tents, the sort of marquee style shade coverings for those that if you haven't got the rooms open and obviously people aren't going to want to sit in their cars, so putting up applying for a grant for a shade marquee if you don't already have one. Again, that's another way of trying to get a sponsor connected by saying, look, we want to get a marquee. We don't have the funds for it. We're applying for a grant. Would you guys be interested in putting your company's logo on the marquee? We want to keep the parents and kids safe because of the COVID environment we're in. So it's another way of trying to get a new sponsor on board and get a shade, but we'll send out a link to all clubs, but keep an eye out for that in our next newsletter from CV. If anyone hasn't signed up for the newsletter from Cricket Victoria, you can via the Cricket Victoria website. There's a link if you go into that club support section. You can sign up for the newsletter to make sure that you get the latest information about grants and advice and updates to the documentation.
It looks like the majority of the questions that have come through, I think we've answered off on just about all of them now.
We might give it a wrap. And thanks everyone for staying on. And once again, thanks all for your supporting cricket. Thanks again to Will behind the scenes there, Paul and Darren for facilitating.
Yeah, thanks Darren and Paul.
Thanks everyone.
No worries.
Thanks,
And
Darren.
Will.
Thank you.
Good evening.